Okay, so it's 1917. Europe's been eating itself alive for 3 years. Millions dead, trenches everywhere, poison gas, the whole nightmare package. And America? America's just chilling across the ocean, watching the chaos unfold like, yeah, that's rough, buddy, but not our problem. Except it became our problem. The US jumped in, helped win the war, and basically shaped the entire 20th century. But what if, and stay with me here, what if America just didn't? What if we kept scrolling past Europe's problems like a sad Instagram post? Well, buckle up, because literally everything you know about modern history would be different. And I mean everything. Let's start with what actually happened. By 1917, Europe had been tearing itself apart for 3 brutal years. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria, were locked in a death struggle against the Allies, Britain, France, Russia, Italy and their partners. Millions had already died. The Western Front had become a nightmarish stalemate of trenches, barbed wire and poison gas. America, under President Woodrow Wilson, had stayed neutral. Wilson campaigned for re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Most Americans wanted nothing to do with Europe's bloodbath. This was an ocean away. This was their problem, not ours. But then, everything changed. Germany made a catastrophic miscalculation. Desperate to break Britain's naval blockade, they unleashed unrestricted submarine warfare in February 1917. German U-boats would sink any ship, military or civilian, neutral or enemy, heading to Allied ports. They knew this would likely bring America into the war, but they gambled they could starve Britain into surrender before American troops arrived in meaningful numbers. Then came the Zimmermann telegram. British intelligence intercepted a secret message from Germany to Mexico, proposing a military alliance against the United States. If Mexico joined the Central Powers, Germany promised to help them reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. American public opinion exploded. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Over the next 18 months, 2 million American soldiers would deploy to France. Their arrival tipped the scales. Fresh troops, vast resources, and industrial might poured into the Allied cause. By November 1918, Germany was exhausted, its people starving, its allies collapsing. The war ended with an Allied victory. But what if none of that happened? What if America stayed out? In our alternate timeline, let's say Germany never resumes unrestricted submarine warfare, or perhaps the Zimmermann telegram is never sent or never intercepted. Maybe Wilson simply holds firm to his neutrality despite pressure. Whatever the reason, America stays out. Spring 1917 arrives without American intervention. The Allies face a crisis. Russia is collapsing into revolution. The February Revolution has already toppled the Tsar. By November, the Bolsheviks will seize power and begin negotiating peace with Germany. The Eastern Front, which has tied down millions of German troops, is about to disappear. France is exhausted. The Nivelle offensive in April 1917 becomes a catastrophic failure, just as it did in our timeline. But here's the difference. Without the promise of American troops arriving soon, French morale doesn't just crack, it shatters. Mutinies spread through the French army. Entire divisions refused to attack. Some historians estimate that half of the French army participated in these mutinies in our real timeline, and they were barely contained. Without American intervention on the horizon, the mutinies become worse. The French government faces a terrible choice: brutal suppression of their own soldiers or seeking peace with Germany. Britain, meanwhile, is being strangled. Even with restricted submarine warfare, the U-boat campaign is taking a devastating toll. Britain depends on imported food and materials. Ship after ship goes to the bottom of the Atlantic. Food rationing becomes more severe. Starvation looms. The British leadership looks across the Atlantic, hoping for American help that never comes. 1917 to 1918. December 1917. In our real timeline, Russia signed an armistice with Germany. In March 1918, they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, surrendering vast territories. This happens in our alternate timeline too, but the consequences are far more severe for the Allies. Germany can now transfer millions of troops from the Eastern Front to the West. In our real history, they launched the Spring Offensive of 1918, a massive, desperate attempt to win the war before American troops arrived in force. They nearly succeeded, breaking through Allied lines and advancing 40 miles, the furthest anyone had moved on the Western Front in 3 years. But they were stopped. Exhausted, overextended, and facing fresh American divisions, the German offensive ground to a halt. In our alternate timeline, there are no American divisions to stop them. March 21st, 1918. Operation Michael begins. German stormtroopers, using new infiltration tactics, smash through British lines. They advance rapidly, recapturing territory lost in years of fighting. The British Fifth Army nearly collapses. Panic spreads. Field Marshal Haig prepares for the possibility of retreat to the Channel ports and evacuation at Dunkirk 22 years early. In our real history, American and French reinforcements stopped the German advance. In our alternate timeline, they don't exist or aren't enough. By May 1918, German forces have captured crucial railway junctions. They've split the British and French armies. Paris is under direct threat, not just from long-range artillery, but from advancing German divisions. The French government begins secret peace negotiations. Here's where it gets really interesting. In our timeline, the Allies won decisively. They could dictate harsh terms at Versailles. But in our alternate timeline, they're losing. Britain and France face several options, none of them good. Option 1, fight on alone, risking total defeat and possible invasion. Without American support, this becomes increasingly untenable. Both nations are exhausted. Their treasuries are empty, their populations are starving and war-weary. Option 2, seek a negotiated peace. This is what happens. By July 1918, secret negotiations are underway. Germany, while victorious, is also exhausted. They've won the war, but at a terrible cost. Millions dead, economy in shambles, population starving from the British naval blockade, which continues. The peace treaty, let's call it the Treaty of Versailles, though it would be completely different, is signed in August 1918. This alternate Treaty of Versailles is not a harsh punishment of Germany. Instead, it's a negotiated settlement between exhausted powers. Germany gains significant territory. Belgium becomes a German puppet state or is annexed entirely. Parts of northeastern France, the industrial regions, come under German control or influence. France pays reparations to Germany for war damages. In the east, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk stands. Germany controls vast territories from the former Russian Empire: Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine, Belarus. These become German satellites or colonies, providing resources and agricultural products. The German, Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires survive. Yes, they're weakened, but they're intact. There's no collapse, no revolution, no dissolution. The map of Europe looks radically different. Germany is the dominant continental power. France is humiliated and diminished. Britain maintains its empire, but loses its influence in Europe. Back in America, the decision to stay neutral has consequences. President Wilson's vision of international cooperation, the League of Nations, self-determination, making the world safe for democracy, never materializes. Without American participation in the war, Wilson has no platform to promote these ideals. America retreats into isolationism. The 1920s see an even stronger America First movement. Why should we care about Europe's problems? Look what happened. They fought their war, sorted it out themselves, and we stayed safe and prosperous. This isolationism runs deeper and lasts longer than in our timeline. American foreign policy focuses on the Western Hemisphere and the Pacific. Europe can handle itself. The economic boom of the 1920s still happens. American industry is intact and thriving. But the cultural exchange, the international cooperation, the sense of America as a world power, all of this develops differently, or not at all. Remember Russia? In our timeline, the Russian Civil War lasted until 1922, with the Bolsheviks eventually winning. Western powers intervened half-heartedly to support the White Russians, but ultimately withdrew. In our alternate timeline, Germany is much more invested in Russia's fate. With their eastern territories adjacent to the chaos of the Russian Civil War, they can't afford a strong, unified communist state on their border. Germany pours military support into the White Russians, not just supplies and advisors, but troops. German divisions occupy and stabilize the western regions, Poland, Ukraine, the Baltics, while supporting anti-Bolshevik forces deeper in Russia. The Russian Civil War becomes longer, bloodier, and more complex. It drags on through the early 1920s. Millions more die. The country is devastated. The outcome? Either the Bolsheviks are defeated entirely and Russia becomes a fractured mess of warlord states and German puppets, or they survive but control a much smaller territory, creating a weaker Soviet Union that develops very differently. No Weimar Republic, no Nazi rise. Here's the big one, the question everyone asks about World War I alternate history. What about Hitler? In our timeline, Germany's defeat created the conditions for Hitler's rise. The Treaty of Versailles was seen as a humiliation. The stab-in-the-back myth spread, claiming Germany hadn't really lost, but was betrayed by politicians. Economic collapse, hyperinflation, and the Great Depression created the perfect storm for extremism. But in our alternate timeline, Germany won. There's no humiliation, no stab in the back, no crushing reparations, no occupation of the Rhineland. Adolf Hitler remains an obscure, failed artist and war veteran. The Nazi Party never gains traction because the conditions that fed it don't exist. The anger, resentment, and desperation that Hitler exploited, none of it is there in the same way. This doesn't mean Germany becomes a democracy. The militaristic, authoritarian German Empire continues. The Kaiser remains in power. Germany might develop other forms of authoritarianism, but the specific horrors of Nazism likely don't emerge. This is where our alternate timeline becomes almost unrecognizable. World War II as we know it probably doesn't happen, at least not in the same form. Without Nazi Germany, there's no Holocaust, no invasion of Poland, no blitzkrieg across Europe, no Eastern Front battles like Stalingrad or Kursk. 6 million Jews aren't systematically murdered. The specific horror of the Nazi regime never occurs. But don't mistake this for a peaceful world. A victorious German Empire still dominates Central and Eastern Europe. Colonial tensions remain. Imperial ambitions don't disappear. Different conflicts arise from different causes. Perhaps a German-British rivalry intensifies. Maybe a war between the empires over colonial possessions. Or civil wars within the surviving empires. Austria-Hungary was already fracturing, and the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe. Japan's ambitions in Asia continue. Without a distracted Europe, Japanese expansion might face stronger resistance or might succeed more completely. The Pacific War could happen in a different form. The Soviet Union, if it survives at all, is much weaker. The Cold War as we know it doesn't happen. There's no ideological battle between communism and capitalism that defines the second half of the 20th century. Think about all the technology that came from or was accelerated by World War II. Radar, jet engines, nuclear weapons, computers, rockets. Some of these develop anyway, but more slowly. Others might not develop at all, or develop in completely different directions. Nuclear weapons are particularly interesting. The Manhattan Project happened because of the fear that Nazi Germany was developing atomic bombs. Without that specific threat, does America invest billions in nuclear research? Maybe, maybe not. The nuclear age might be delayed by decades. Culturally, the world is completely different. The literature, art, music, and film shaped by World War II, all of it changes or doesn't exist. No works about the Holocaust, no stories of D-Day or the Battle of Britain. Different heroes, different villains, different narratives. The generation that in our timeline fought World War II, the greatest generation, has a completely different experience. They don't unite in a global struggle against fascism. They live in a world dominated by imperial powers and different forms of authoritarianism. By the 21st century, what does the world look like? Germany is likely the dominant European power, perhaps an EU-like structure but centred on German imperial interests rather than democratic cooperation. France is diminished. Britain maintains influence through its empire but isn't the power broker it was. The United States might still rise as an economic superpower, but without the world wars to project its military power globally, it remains more isolated. American culture doesn't dominate the world the way it does in our timeline. Decolonization happens differently. Without World War II weakening the European empires, independence movements face stronger resistance. Colonial empires might persist longer or collapse more violently. The technology gap could be significant. Without the accelerated development of World War II and the Cold War space race, we might be decades behind where we are now in certain technologies. Democracy spreads more slowly or not at all. The demonstration effect of the Allies' victory over fascism in World War II helped legitimize democracy globally. Without that, authoritarianism has more staying power. So what if the United States had never entered World War I? The answer is, almost everything would be different. Germany dominates Europe, Russia is fractured or communist but weaker. The British and French empires are diminished but intact. The United States remains isolated. World War II as we know it doesn't happen. The Holocaust doesn't happen. The Cold War doesn't happen. The entire architecture of the 20th century, the United Nations, NATO, the European Union, the post-war order, none of it exists. It's impossible to say if this world would be better or worse. Different doesn't mean improved. Without the specific horrors of Nazism, millions of lives are saved. But different conflicts claim different victims. Imperialism persists. Democracy spreads more slowly. What we can say is this: American intervention in World War I was a pivot point in history. It determined not just who won that war, but the shape of the entire century that followed. One decision, to enter or stay out, cascaded through decades, affecting billions of lives. History isn't inevitable, it's contingent. It depends on choices made by individuals and nations at critical moments. The world we live in today is just one possibility among many that could have been. And that's what makes alternative history so fascinating. It shows us that the present wasn't predetermined. It was created. By decisions, by accidents, by the complex interplay of human choices and random chance. The next time someone asks why history matters, remember this: understanding what happened helps us see what could have happened, and that helps us understand what could happen next. What do you think? Would this alternate world be better or worse? What other consequences can you imagine? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into alternative history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more explorations of history's most fascinating what-ifs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.